Picture this. A 34-year-old captain walks into a presidential palace in West Africa, not as a guest, but as the new leader of 22 million people. Within 48 hours, he's expelled French ambassadors, nationalized gold mines, and declared war on a system that had enslaved his continent for centuries. The global establishment called him reckless. His people called him a hero. But here's what's truly shocking. This isn't happening in some Hollywood movie. This is happening right now, in 2024, in Burkina Faso, and it's sending shockwaves through the corridors of power from Paris to Washington. Why would a geology student turned soldier risk everything to challenge empires? How did a man who once studied rocks become the earthquake that's reshaping African politics? What does this tell us about the explosive awakening happening across our continent right now? The answers will change everything you thought you knew about African leadership, sovereignty, and the price of freedom. Let's discover the untold story of Ibrahim Traoré. Welcome to the world of research. Welcome to the large family of Win Wisdom. In Narrations, I'm your host, and today we're diving deep into one of the most explosive stories in contemporary African politics. When Captain Ibrahim Traoré seized power in Burkina Faso on September 30th, 2022, the world's media dismissed it as just another African coup. They were catastrophically wrong. What they witnessed wasn't just a change of government. It was the birth of a revolutionary movement that would redefine what it means to be African in the 21st century. The morning after Traoré's takeover, something unprecedented happened. French companies began evacuating their personnel. The West African Economic Community held emergency meetings. And in the streets of Ouagadougou, young people danced with AK-47s, singing songs of liberation that their grandparents thought they'd never hear again. But what the international media missed, what they're still missing, is the deeper story. This isn't just about one man or one country. This is about the emergence of a new generation of African leaders who refuse to bow, refuse to beg, and refuse to accept the colonial playbook that's kept our continent in chains for over a century. Ibrahim Traoré didn't just overthrow a government. He weaponized hope. He militarized dignity. And he turned the impossible into the inevitable. Consider this. In less than 2 years, he's launched over 50 megaprojects worth billions of dollars. He's built the first nuclear power plant in his country's history. He's created the first locally made electric vehicle in West Africa. He's banned second-hand clothing imports and mandated that every government uniform be made from traditional African textiles. That's not politics. That's cultural revolution. But what happened next changed everything. The Thomas Sankara Mausoleum stands 87 meters tall in the heart of Ouagadougou. Exactly 87 meters, marking each year since Sankara's assassination. When Ibrahim Traoré commissioned this monument, he wasn't just honoring a fallen hero. He was declaring war on historical amnesia. You see, Traoré understood something that escaped his predecessors. You can't build a future on a foundation of forgotten greatness. Thomas Sankara had been Burkina Faso's revolutionary president from 1983 to 1987, a man who renamed his country from the colonial Upper Volta to Burkina Faso, meaning land of the upright people. Sankara had been Africa's Che Guevara, a leader who refused French aid, grew his own food, and drove the cheapest car in his motorcade. But here's where this gets interesting. Sankara was assassinated in 1987 by his best friend, Blaise Compaoré, who then ruled for 27 years as a French puppet. For 3 decades, Sankara's name was erased from textbooks, his image banned from public spaces, his revolutionary legacy buried beneath layers of neo-colonial compliance. When Traoré built that mausoleum, he wasn't just constructing a monument. He was performing a resurrection. He was telling 22 million Burkinabe that their revolutionary spirit wasn't dead, it was just sleeping. And now it was time to wake up. The impact was immediate and volcanic. Within weeks of the mausoleum's inauguration, similar monuments began appearing across West Africa. Young people started wearing Sankara t-shirts in Mali, Niger, and Senegal. The phrase, upright people, became a rallying cry from Lagos to Accra. But the most powerful moment came when Traoré invited Thomas Sankara's widow, Mariam, to speak at the dedication ceremony. She hadn't been allowed to publicly honor her husband's memory for 35 years. When she took the microphone, her voice breaking with emotion, she said, "Today, Thomas didn't just get a monument. He got his country back. The crowd of 50,000 people erupted in cheers so loud they could be heard in neighboring countries. Literally, videos of that moment went viral across Africa, shared millions of times with captions like, "This is what liberation looks like," and, finally, a leader who remembers who he is. And that's when the establishment panicked. Before we dive deeper into what happened next, I want to take a moment to acknowledge this incredible community we're building together. When I started this channel, I had a simple mission: to tell the stories that mainstream media won't tell, to amplify the voices they choose to silence, and to connect the dots they pretend don't exist. Every week, thousands of you join this family. And you're not just watching, you're participating in something bigger. You're part of a movement that's reclaiming our narrative, celebrating our victories, and refusing to let our stories be told by people who don't understand our struggles. If you're new here, welcome home. If you've been riding with us, you know that this isn't just entertainment. This is education. This is empowerment. This is the revolution televised. Hit that subscribe button because we're just getting started, and trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Now, back to Burkina Faso, where the real battle was about to begin. The French government's response to Traoré's rise was swift and brutal. They immediately suspended all development aid for $100 million annually. They pressured the European Union to impose sanctions. They whispered in the ears of neighboring presidents, warning them about the dangerous precedent being set in Ouagadougou. But here's what they didn't expect. Ibrahim Traoré had been preparing for this moment his entire life. Unlike previous African leaders who came to power through elections or inherited wealth, Traoré had spent years studying the failures of post-independence Africa. He'd watched countries like his own neighbor, Mali, cycle through coup after coup, each new leader promising change, but delivering more of the same dependency. As a geology student, Traoré had learned something crucial. You can't build a stable structure on unstable ground. And Africa's ground had been deliberately destabilized by centuries of exploitation, decades of structural adjustment programs, and generations of leaders who confused being in power with being empowered. When the French aid stopped flowing, Traoré didn't panic. He pivoted. Within 90 days of taking power, he had signed strategic partnerships with Russia, China, and Turkey, not as a junior partner begging for scraps, but as an equal negotiating from a position of strength. The $4 billion nuclear power deal with Russia wasn't just about electricity. It was about energy independence. The joint ventures with Chinese companies weren't just about infrastructure. They were about technology transfer and skills development. But the move that really shocked the world came in March 2023, when Traoré announced that Burkina Faso would no longer accept French as its official language. Government documents would be published in local languages. Court proceedings would be conducted in Moor, Dioula, and Fulfulde. School curriculums would prioritize African history and culture. The symbolism was explosive. For the first time since independence, an African leader was saying, "We don't need your language to govern our people. We don't need your approval to make our decisions. We are the children of great civilizations, and we will speak with the tongues of our ancestors." The response from young Africans was immediate and overwhelming. Videos of Traoré's speeches were downloaded millions of times. His quotes became social media captions. His image appeared on murals from Dakar to Nairobi. But the real test of his revolution wasn't happening in the digital space. It was happening in the streets, in the villages, in the hearts of people who had almost forgotten what it felt like to be proud. And that's where everything changed. The morning of August 27th, 2024, will be remembered as the day Africa's economic liberation began. That's when Ibrahim Traoré signed the decree nationalizing the Bongo and Wagnan gold mines, wresting control from foreign corporations and returning Burkina Faso's mineral wealth to its people. But here's what makes this moment truly historic. It wasn't just about gold. It was about dignity. For over a century, African resources had been extracted by foreign companies, processed abroad, and sold back to us at inflated prices. We were rich in everything except the profits from our own wealth. Traoré didn't just break this cycle. He obliterated it. The numbers tell the story. In 2023, Burkina Faso's gold exports generated $3.8 billion in revenue. Under the previous system, less than 15% of that value stayed in the country. Under Traoré's nationalization program, that figure jumped to over 80%. That's not just economic policy, that's economic revolution. But the ripple effects extended far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. Within 6 months of the nationalization, similar movements emerged across Africa. Mali's military government began renegotiating mining contracts. Niger's leaders started demanding higher royalties from uranium companies. Ghana's youth organized protests demanding the nationalization of their gold mines. The message was clear: the era of resource extraction without compensation was over. A new generation of African leaders was awakening to the reality that true sovereignty meant controlling your own wealth. And then came the moment that changed everything, when Traoré announced the construction of Burkina Faso's first gold refinery. He wasn't just building a factory, he was building a future. For the first time in the country's history, Burkinabe gold would be refined by Burkinabe hands, creating thousands of jobs and generating billions in additional revenue. But the symbolism went deeper. At the refinery's groundbreaking ceremony, Traoré held up a piece of raw gold ore and said, "This rock contains the power to transform our nation. But for 62 years, we've been sending this power to other countries so they could become rich while we remained poor. Today, we take back our power." The crowd's response was thunderous. But the real impact was felt in boardrooms from London to Toronto, where mining executives realized that the old rules of African resource extraction were crumbling. The backlash was immediate and fierce. Western governments imposed sanctions. International media launched smear campaigns. Think tanks published reports warning of African authoritarianism and dangerous populism. But here's what they misunderstood. This wasn't about one man's ambition. This was about a continent's awakening. The most powerful moment in this transformation came during the inauguration of the Thomas Sankara Mausoleum in September 2024. As Traoré stood before the 87-meter monument, he delivered a speech that would be remembered as the Upright People Address. Thomas Sankara taught us that a soldier without political education is a potential criminal, Traoré said, his voice carrying across the plaza to hundreds of thousands of gathered citizens. But a politician without revolutionary consciousness is a guaranteed traitor. We are not politicians. We are revolutionaries. And our revolution is not for sale. The speech was broadcast live across Africa and shared millions of times on social media. But its impact went beyond clicks and views. It crystallized a new African consciousness, one that refused to apologize for its ambitions, refused to compromise its sovereignty, and refused to accept the limitations imposed by others. Young Africans from Cape Town to Cairo began organizing upright people movements in their own countries. University students in Nigeria demanded the removal of colonial statues. Youth in Kenya organized protests against land grabbing by foreign corporations. Workers in South Africa launched strikes demanding economic transformation. The movement had transcended borders, transcended ethnicities, transcended the artificial divisions that had kept Africa fragmented for generations. But the most profound impact was psychological. For the first time in decades, young Africans could look to their own continent and see a model of leadership that inspired rather than disappointed them. Ibrahim Traoré wasn't just governing Burkina Faso, he was governing the imagination of African youth. While the world focused on the political drama, something even more significant was happening quietly across Burkina Faso. The most ambitious infrastructure revolution in African history. In 18 months, Traoré's government launched 50,000 kilometers of new roads, 4 new universities, 500 new schools, 100 new hospitals, 3 new airports, a national railway system, a nuclear power plant, an electric vehicle manufacturing plant. But here's what makes this extraordinary. 90% of these projects were being built by Burkinabe companies, employing Burkinabe workers, using Burkinabe materials. This wasn't just construction, it was capacity building. Every road built trained new engineers. Every hospital constructed created new skilled workers. Every school erected developed new teachers. The cumulative effect was transformative. Youth unemployment, which had been over 40% when Traoré took power, dropped to 15% by 2024. University enrollment increased by 300%. life expectancy rose by 3 years. But the most remarkable statistic was this: for the first time since independence, more young Burkinabe were returning home from the diaspora than leaving. The brain drain had reversed into a brain gain. Perhaps the most profound aspect of Traoré's revolution was cultural. The ban on second-hand clothing imports wasn't just economic policy. It was a declaration of cultural independence. The mandate that all government uniforms be made from traditional Faso Danfani textile wasn't just about supporting local industry. It was about reclaiming African aesthetics, the decision to replace European wigs with traditional African attire in courtrooms wasn't just about comfort. It was about decolonizing the justice system. The elevation of local languages to official status wasn't just about communication. It was about validating African ways of knowing. Each of these changes might seem small individually, but collectively they represented a fundamental shift in how Burkinabe saw themselves and their place in the world. The impact on young people was particularly powerful. For the first time, they could see their culture, their languages, their traditions reflected in the highest institutions of their land. They didn't have to choose between being African and being modern. They could be both. And that's when the real revolution began. By 2024, the Traoré effect had spread across Africa like wildfire. Similar movements emerged in Niger. Military leaders began demanding higher royalties from uranium mining companies and expelled French forces. Mali, the government renegotiated mining contracts and strengthened partnerships with Russia and China. Chad, youth movements organized protests, demanding economic transformation and resource nationalization. Guinea, the military government began reviewing foreign mining concessions and implementing local content requirements. Senegal, the newly elected government promised to renegotiate oil and gas contracts to ensure greater local benefits. But the impact wasn't limited to Africa. In Haiti, protesters carried signs reading, "We need our own Traoré." In Venezuela, opposition leaders praised his model of resource nationalism. In the Middle East, young activists studied his methods of cultural decolonization. The message was clear: the world was watching, learning, and beginning to demand their own versions of the Burkina Faso miracle that AS 2025 began. Ibrahim Traoré stood before the United Nations General Assembly and delivered a speech that would be remembered as the New Africa Address. "The Africa you knew is gone," he declared. "The Africa that begged for aid while sitting on trillions of dollars in resources. The Africa that apologized for its existence while feeding the world. The Africa that whispered when it should have roared. That Africa is dead." He paused, letting his words sink in across the silent assembly hall. In its place rises a new Africa, an Africa that negotiates as an equal, an Africa that processes its own resources, an Africa that speaks its own languages, an Africa that tells its own stories, an Africa that refuses to be anyone's junior partner. The speech was interrupted by applause 17 times. When he finished, the standing ovation lasted 8 minutes. But the real impact came afterward, when African diplomats from other countries began approaching him, asking for advice on how to implement similar transformations in their own nations. The revolution had gone global. Today, as we watch Ibrahim Traoré's Burkina Faso transform before our eyes, we're witnessing something unprecedented in modern African history. A successful revolution that's actually improving people's lives. The statistics are undeniable. GDP growth, 8.5% annually. Youth unemployment, down from 40% to 15%. Life expectancy, increased by 3 years. School enrollment, up 300%. Infrastructure investment, $12 billion in 18 months. But beyond the numbers lies something more profound: hope. For the first time in generations, young Africans can look to their own continent and see a model of leadership that inspires them. They can envision a future where being African isn't a limitation. It's a superpower. The revolution that began in Burkina Faso isn't just about one country or one leader. It's about the emergence of a new African consciousness, one that refuses to accept the limitations imposed by others, refuses to apologize for its ambitions, and refuses to let anyone else define its possibilities. As Thomas Sankara once said, "You cannot carry out fundamental change without a certain amount of madness." Ibrahim Traoré has proven that sometimes the world needs a little madness to wake up to new possibilities. The revolution continues. And it's just getting started. What do you think? Which of Traoré's transformations impressed you most? Are we witnessing the birth of a new Africa? Or is this just another false dawn? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. And if this story inspired you, subscribe to join our family of truth seekers. We're building a community of people who refuse to accept the official narrative, who demand the full story, and who believe that our stories deserve to be told with the power they deserve. The revolution isn't just happening in Burkina Faso. It's happening in our minds, in our hearts, and in our courage to imagine a different future. Are you ready to be part of it? Welcome to the world of research. Welcome to the family. The revolution continues.